Hi folks, and welcome to another installment of your Daily Choose. Today I want to take a look at another Magnus game, a game that he played during the 4th round of the Outer Suite Photos tournament by the Black Sea coast in Ukraine. Magnus has been on a roll so far, scoring 5 out of 6 points and leading by half time, and achieving a tournament presentation rating of around 3000 ELO points, something like that. Well, during the 4th round he played a very exciting game against Pavel Elyanov. And in this position Elyanov is white and Carlsen is black, and it is his move. He plays here d3, and the threat is of course to go to e3 with the queen and decide matters immediately. So Elyanov felt obliged to now play queen e3 and exchange queens. So that's what happened. And now Carlsen took the pawn on h3. And we can see now that a very interesting endgame has arisen. Carlsen has a rook against 2 knights, and he's also going to win a few pawns, and of course this monster on h3 needs to be stopped. So this explains Elyanov's next move, knight h3 to stop the pawn. Now Carlsen takes the a3 pawn, and Elyanov moves his king towards the h pawn. He wants to do a change of tasks within his army. This king is going to stop this pawn, and these 2 knights are going to try and stop these 2 pawns. Okay, so rook a4 followed, attacking the b pawn. King g1 was played. Now let's see what could have happened if Elyanov would have tried to play for the blockade immediately. Then knight b3 was possible, but then there would follow rook takes b4, knight fd2. The knights are now protecting each other, but Carlsen now has rook g4, and this attacks the pawn on g3. So now he can use this pawn on h3 to distract the white king, and then in the end gain the g3 pawn. So this would have been quite a quick win for black. So after rook a4 it was quite precise of Elyanov to play king g1 first here. Okay, now there followed rook takes b4, king h2, and since the black rook is now in the way of this free pawn, Carlsen has to decide where to move the rook. And it's not so easy to move it towards the center along the 4th rank, because the knights, they are controlling a number of squares, and Carlsen decides that from a4 his rook has the best possible range. Okay, now king takes h3, this pawn was goner anyway, and Carlsen could have tried to run here with his b pawn, but that would have been quite weak. Let's have a look. For instance, b4, king g2, rook a3, overprotecting b3 and kind of preparing b3, king f2, b3, and now knight c4. This is a very strong defense. After rook a4, knight fd2, it becomes quite clear that black's pawns are not really able to move forward, and white's king is already very close to these pawns, and this guy here is in danger. So again, after king h3, Carlsen plays very cautiously and very strong. He first moves around his rook all the way to a8, and we will see shortly why he does that. And now Elyanov starts preparing the blockade with his 2 knights and attacks the b5 pawn. So b4 was played, king g4, also preparing to centralize the king, bring it back into the battle. But now follows rook e8, and I suppose that was the point of rook a8, because on e8 it makes sure that white's king cannot really go over to the queen side. Well, white tries to play actively with king f5, and now rook e2. Black is starting to attack the knights, and now they have to start protecting each other. Knight for b3. And black wants now to bring in the other attacking unit, king f8. Knight e4 was played here, king e7, and now king e5, trying to prevent black's king from coming any closer. And here rook g2 was played by Carlsen, and king f4 was played. Now you wonder, why does the white king give up his stronghold on e5? Let's have a look. Maybe he could have moved one of the knights, you know, like knight bd2, but then there would follow a check, king f5, rook e2, and g4. I suppose this was another attempt to defend, and maybe it was even a little bit more tenacious than what Elyanov did in the game. So maybe he should not have given up his stronghold with the king on e5 so quickly and should have gone for this. But anyway, after rook g2 he played king f4, then king e6 followed, king f3. This attacks the rook on g2 and also now suddenly threatens knight c5 check and picking up the d3 pawn. So now rook e2 was played, but still white now manages to pick up the pawn, but it is at a cost, because now black's king is really going towards the king side, queen side, sorry, king e5. Knight takes d3, rook e8, again blocking the e-file, and we can see now that black's king has come quite a long way, you know, from g8, and it is now really participating in the attack on the queen side. Knight a5 was played, rook b8 with the threat of b3, so white now blocks the b3 square, king c5, knight d3 check followed, and this has a very small trap, because if Carlsen would now have played king b5, then knight takes b4 would have been possible, and the game is a draw immediately. Because it's not possible to take here because of this check, and it's also not possible to take here because of this check. Okay, so after knight d3, Carlsen went back with his king to d5, and of course Elyanov moved back also with his knight to c1. So now black has to try something else, and he plays rook c8. I suppose the best defense here would have been to play knight d3, and the idea of knight d3 is that it blocks the third rank, and that has the benefit that the black rook cannot easily attack the pawn on g3. There could have followed, for instance, rook c3, king e2, b3, which is now possible, king d2, king d4, attacking the knight, knight c1, double attacking the pawn, rook c2 check, king d1, king c3, but after knight a takes b3, it becomes clear that white has saved the day. So I think that knight c3 in this position would have been a very good defense, and I'm not sure if black would have been able to win the game in that case. But after knight c2, Elyanov did not play knight d3, he played knight c goes to b3. And now black has a bit more chances. He plays king e5. Yes, king e5. And king e2 followed here. Rook c2 check. King f3. If king d1, then rook c3 attacks the g3 pawn. And after knight c1, threatening knight c6 check, white would also probably be still able to hold the game. But after rook c2 check, white chose to play king f3, rook c3 check, king g4 now, and king e4, knight b7 followed, and now Carlsen could have played f5 check, but he played king d3 instead. Let's have a look at this f5 check move. King h4, this is virtually the only move, and after rook c2 he would have maintained very good winning chances. But he didn't play f5 check. Instead of that he played king d3, and Elyanov could now have tried to continue his defense with knight 7 a5, but after king c2, knight d4 check, king b2, king f4, black does not seem to have a useful move, and this is mainly due to the fact that now his king is in front of his own b pawn, and you know, the knights are just jumping around and black cannot really get to them. But Elyanov did not take this chance after king d3. Instead, he played the probably losing move knight 3 to a5. And this is losing because it leads to a decisive loss of the communication between the two knights. It would have been better to switch the knights around like we just saw, because now this knight here is in danger because it can be very easily chased around by black's rook all the time. We will now see what happened. King d4 was played, and this prepares to play king e5, and after king e5 all these squares here on c5, d6 and d8 would be taken away from this knight on b7, and all of a sudden these knights are in danger. Where earlier they could just jump around and make fools of the black pieces, now they are really in dire straits. So king f4 followed, king d5 also taking away these squares here from the knight on b7, knight d8 followed, but after rook c8 it becomes clear that the knight is in trouble. Knight d goes to b7, just trying to maintain some kind of communication between the knights. And the quickest win now would have been rook c7, because this threatens to play b3, because the white knight cannot take it, because then it would have to let go of the defense of the knight on b7. And after knight d8, rook c5 attacking the a5 knight would be very nasty, and then after knight db7, rook b5 really decides matters. Okay, so let's go back to the game. After knight db7, Carlsen played his rook back to c3 again, and there was a small repetition of moves. Knight d8, and of course he could have played knight c7, or sorry, rook c8 again, and then rook c7, but he played rook a3, which is also good enough. Knight d c6 was now played, but now black can move his pawn, and white is now forced to sacrifice his knight for this pawn, and of course this position is winning for black, even though it takes some technique. But Magnus Carlsen was up to the task, and the final moves were knight e5, rook b1, that indirectly protects the pawn on f7, so if white would now take on f7, then rook f1 check, winning the knight would follow, g4, rook f1 check, knight f3, king e6, king g3, rook a1, king f4, rook a4 check, king g3, king d5, knight h4, and now black is finally closing in. King e4, g5, king e5. The white pieces have less and less squares to go to. King f4, and after g6, king g5, which attacks both the knight on h4 and the pawn on g6. Elyanov resigned. So, a very nice example of Carlsen's endgame fighting spirit, and a very well deserved win. Fantastic end to a magnificent game. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, and please, until next time, bye.